One of the things that distinguishes the South is we industrialized more slowly than other regions. And so there are some more traditions of interacting with the land, harvesting the land, growing things on the land. There's an interesting intermingling in a lot of places in the South of sort of black and white and indigenous cultures, and now increasingly other cultures as well. And so there's a closeness with the land that a lot of people in the South have that I think is valuable.
Hey there, I'm Jesse Mayshark, and this is Headlights, Voices from the Progressive South. Headlights is a production of the Progressive South, a nonprofit media platform dedicated to amplifying progressive voices and values across the southern United States. Voices like writer and publisher Boyce Upholt, who you heard up top. He just launched a new magazine called Southlands, dedicated to exploring natural landscapes of the South and the many ways those of us who live here interact with them. He's also the author of a great new book about the Mississippi River. That conversation is coming up, and in our arts and culture segment, we'll check in on a celebration of indigenous culture in Atlanta. But first, it's time for the news roundup. This week, after the Charlie Kirk firings come the Charlie Kirk firing lawsuits. As you probably remember, in the days immediately following the murder of the conservative activist Charlie Kirk in September, social media was ablaze with commentary, and almost immediately full of online vigilantes looking for anyone saying anything negative about the right-wing firebrand. A whole bunch of people across the country were fired or disciplined by their employers for comments that ranged from savage to sad, but were judged in one way or another offensive to Kirk's memory. There were, of course, some serious ironies to this vindictive purge. The first is that Kirk himself said a whole lot of very offensive things during his career as a professional provocateur. He said things that were crudely racist and sexist and bigoted against Muslims and LGBTQ people and immigrants and anyone else who didn't fit his narrow ideas of who deserved rights and respect in America. The second is that he was also an avowed believer in free speech, arguing that even the most offensive speech should be protected. Like many on the right, Kirk seemed to imagine that it would be mostly conservatives like himself on the receiving end of any censorship or crackdown on free speech. Going back at least to Rush Limbaugh, the modern American right has fashioned itself as rebels against the cultural establishment, telling uncomfortable truths, fighting political correctness, refusing to be woke. Part of that mythos is that they are constantly in danger of being punished or canceled for their bold views. Conservatives howled about even half-hearted attempts by social media platforms to block disinformation and falsehoods at the height of the COVID pandemic. Right-wing members of Congress held hearings trying and failing to prove that the platforms were biased against conservative users. But in 2025, those shoes are on somewhat different feet. Social media platforms are mostly run by Trump-friendly billionaires, and many conservatives are suddenly enthusiastic about not just deplatforming people whose views they don't like, but attempting to ruin their lives and livelihoods as well. The Charlie Kirk backlash happened across the country, but it was especially pronounced in the South, where political and government leaders often jumped in or even helped lead the online mobs demanding retribution for negative comments about the murdered activist. And that's where the legalities get interesting. In general, private sector employees don't have much free speech protection when it comes to their jobs, especially non-union workers in so-called right-to-work states, where almost all employment is assumed to be at will and subject to the discretion of the employer. Your average sandwich shop employee can absolutely be fired because their boss didn't like something they posted on Instagram. But public sector workers have more constitutional safeguards. Whether they work for a local, state, or federal agency, they are employees of the government. So if their bosses retaliate against them for their private speech, that is the equivalent of government censorship. Over the years, federal courts have carved out protections for the speech of public employees, although it's not absolute. If employees are speaking or presenting themselves as official voices for their agency, they can be held accountable or punished for their speech in much the same way as private sector employees. Another factor that can come into play is whether the speech creates disruptions in the workplace, as, for example, a racist comment might in a racially diverse office. Public employees' First Amendment protections are greatest if they are engaging in speech as private citizens, not at work, not communicating in any official capacity, and also if they are speaking on matters of public concern. Now, some of the public employees penalized for comments about Kirk after his death are seeking to assert those rights in court. Many of them are in the South. Starting close to home for me, University of Tennessee anthropology professor Tamar Sherinian has sued the university for suspending her and moving to fire her because of a private comment she made on a friend's Facebook post. It is true that Sherinian used some strong language in her comment about Kirk. She wrote that, quote, "the world is better off without him in it," and added, "his kids are better off living in a world without a disgusting psychopath like him, and his wife, well, she's a sick fuck for marrying him, so I don't care about her feelings," unquote. It is also true, as her lawsuit makes clear, that she made the comment in her personal capacity on a friend's post, with no reference at all to her employer. She was obviously not speaking in a professional capacity. Sherinian's federal suit notes that university officials, who are state employees themselves and therefore representatives of the government, appeared to be acting in response to outrage stirred up on social media after a screenshot of her comment was circulated. One of those who weighed in was Senator Marsha Blackburn, who is also the leading candidate to be Tennessee's next governor. Quote, "Another lunatic left-wing radical who should be fired immediately," Blackburn wrote about Sherinian in a social media post. Congressman Tim Burchett, whose district includes the university campus, also posted that he had contacted university officials about it. Sherinian's suit says the university's retaliation against her is a clear violation of her First Amendment rights. It also quotes the university's own policy affirming principles of free speech for students and faculty, which states in part that the university, quote, "must be committed to maintaining a campus as a marketplace of ideas for all students and all faculty, in which the free exchange of ideas is not to be suppressed because the ideas put forth are thought by some or even by most members of the university's community to be offensive, unwise, immoral, indecent, disagreeable, conservative, liberal, traditional, radical, or wrong-headed." Sherinian is not the only Tennessee faculty member seeking redress. Over at Middle Tennessee State University in Murfreesboro, Laura Sosh-Lightsey, a 21-year staff member, was fired from her position as the Associate Dean of Student Care and Conduct for her own comments about Kirk. Noting Kirk's enthusiastic support for gun rights and his dismissive attitude toward the victims of mass shootings, Sosh-Lightsey wrote, quote, "looks like old Charlie spoke his fate into existence." She added, "Hate begets hate, zero sympathy." She also said she was, quote, "not celebrating the loss of Charlie Kirk's life," and added, "violence is not the answer." A Virginia Republican committee member saw and shared her posts online where, once again, Marsha Blackburn saw them and posted, quote, "this person should be ashamed of her post. She should be removed from her position at MTSU." University officials obediently fired Sosh-Lightsey later that evening. Sosh-Lightsey has filed her own federal lawsuit, which says that MTSU bowed to, quote, "public pressure to terminate plaintiff's employment for protected speech on a matter of public concern based on the speech's viewpoint." It also notes that, like the University of Tennessee, MTSU has a free speech policy that guarantees the rights of students and staff to express controversial views. The policy says, quote, "it is not MTSU's role to attempt to shield individuals from free speech, including ideas and opinions they find offensive, unwise, immoral, indecent, disagreeable, conservative, liberal, traditional, radical, or wrong-headed." Meanwhile, in Alabama, Auburn University lecturer Candace Hale has sued the school for firing her after her own Kirk-related post. She had written, quote, "I do not mourn oppressors. I do not show them empathy. I don't give a damn about evil, racist, fascist, misogynistic, homophobic, transphobic, xenophobic, mediocre white men who claim to be Christian and then do everything Christ would not do on earth." Her suit also invokes the First Amendment, along with the university's own policy on free speech. Defendants, acting under color of state law, subjected Hale to an investigation, suspended her, terminated her employment, and banned her from Auburn University because of her speech, the suit says. Defendants intentionally retaliated against plaintiff because she exercised her First Amendment rights. Similar suits have been filed by a professor at Clemson University in South Carolina, a teacher's assistant at Spartanburg County Public Schools, also in South Carolina, an accountant at Eastern Florida State College, and a state fish and wildlife biologist, also in Florida. You can find links to all of those in our show notes. Given the number of firings reported in the wake of Kirk's death, it's entirely possible more suits are still to come. These suits are all in their early stages, but they can maybe take some hope from a federal court order in another similar case in South Dakota. An art professor named Michael Hook at the University of South Dakota was placed on leave 2 days after calling Kirk a, quote, hate-spreading Nazi on his personal Facebook page. He promptly sued, and in September, a federal judge ordered him reinstated while his lawsuit continues. The judge found that Hook had spoken as a private citizen on a matter of public concern, and that the university hadn't so far shown that Hook's post created a disruption on campus. We'll keep you posted as these cases move forward. Now we're to my interview with Boyce Upholt. He's a writer and reporter who grew up in the suburbs of Connecticut and first moved south for a teaching job in Mississippi. He became fascinated by the overwhelming presence of the Mississippi River and the way it has shaped and been shaped by human culture and enterprise. Fittingly, he lives in New Orleans, where that interplay is ever present. He calls himself a nature critic, and he has written for publications including The Atlantic, National Geographic, Oxford American, and Virginia Quarterly Review. Earlier this year, W. Norton and Company published his book The Great River, The Making and Unmaking of the Mississippi. It's an ambitious and very well-written book that is something like a biography of the river, from its geology and geography to the roles it has played in human habitation for millennia. And Upton has just launched a new magazine called Southlands, devoted to outdoor writing about the South. You can find it at southlandsmag.com. Its goal is to highlight and celebrate the many wild landscapes and features of our region, to consider and illuminate our relationships with them, and also to spur a passion for them that can help protect and preserve them for future generations. We talked about all of those things, as well as the complexities of the Southern nostalgia for a more rural past. Boyce Upholt, thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks, Jesse. Really excited to be here.
So let's start out. I want to ask you about a bunch of things, but let's just start out with your new project, Southlands Magazine, which I think is really exciting and is very ambitious. I think anybody trying to start a magazine in 2025 is pretty ambitious. But what are your goals with this, and specifically, like what's the need that you see this filling for having this kind of journalism located here and about the South? Yeah, I wish I should have more practiced answers to this, but I'm glad to develop them here. So I'll start just by explaining what it is. Southlands is going to be it is a biannual print journal, so we're going to at least at first ship out issues twice a year. Maybe we'll go up to 4 times a year. I haven't quite figured that out, but it's there's sort of a new breed of magazine over the past couple of years where they're coming out less frequently, but they're going to be bigger and thicker. So this is the first issue is 140 pages. It is 9.5 by 12 inches. Yeah, so an inch extra around every side on a computer standard page size, right? So when it arrives, it has that sort of heft. And yeah, I was packing up a lot of them this morning and realizing the heft that way too. It'll look good on the coffee table.
Yes, that is the idea. I'm hoping that if you have a copy and you have friends come over, they're going to say, "What the heck is that?" and want to pick it up. And so it's going to explore nature and outdoors culture in the South is often the shorthand, but I think when I'm more expansive with that, to me, it's exploring what relationship Southerners have with the natural world, documenting that. And there's sort of a twofold goal, soft goals, not numerical goals. But one is just to celebrate some of the beauty we have here. One of the motivators for the magazine is there is this new generation of outdoors magazines doing really great work. Surfer's Journal, Mountain Gazette, Adventure Journal, right? Of the same format that I'm talking about. But I think a lot of those are produced out west and wind up focusing not solely, but largely on the West, which is a place that sits at the center of so much outdoors mythology.
Sure.
And so I think that some of our landscapes, some of our assets are maybe under-recognized in the national conversation. So part of the magazine is just that. It's like, let's celebrate the really beautiful, cool things we can do here. Let's celebrate the traditions that matter here. But then also I want half the content or so to challenge readers as well, to think about both what do we need to do here in the South to make sure it stays beautiful? And then economic access is really important to me, right? Given the sort of economic and racial history of the South, I want to think about who is able to have these outdoor experiences, who is not, what are the implications of that? What do we need to do to make sure that they are more democratically accessible to more people?
Sure, and my impression from looking at the you have a couple of articles from the first issue up on your website at southlandsmag.com, right, is the website?
That is the website.
That you're, I mean, I don't know if you embrace the term literary journalism or not, but, you know, these are very well-written, thoughtful pieces. You're not doing sort of like the 5 hottest mountain towns in the Appalachians or those kind of clickbaity things, which some of the poppier outdoor writing you see kind of tends toward.
Yeah, no, none of that. I'm really avoiding that as much as possible. Partially, it's just a factor of if this is going to come out. You know, I'm putting stories up every week, but those are stories that are already in this issue that I'm shipping now, right? So basically, these come out once every 6 months, and that's part of that sort of demands that we feature writing that has longevity, right? Versions of stories that, hopefully they're going to mean a lot right now and sort of open people's eyes to important ideas and issues in this current moment. But I want them to be stories that, 2, 5, 10 years down the line, if you pick up the back issues that you still have lying around, they'll mean something. And yeah, I'm a big reader of The New Yorker. I think about Outside in its sort of classic era. There's a lot of, it's that sort of long form storytelling. That's one of the other major goals. That's the kind of writing I love to do. And I wanted there to be a space for more of that kind of writing about this region where I live. So,
right. And so speaking of the region where you live, like you like me, you didn't grow up in the South, right? You're from Connecticut originally?
Hartford, yeah. Born in Chicago, but 3 months there, and then I grew up in the suburbs outside of Hartford, Connecticut.
And so, what kind of first brought you south, and then once you came south, I guess what turned you outward? Were you already? I don't know. Did you grow up as an outdoorsy kid? Were you already somebody who was going hiking and camping and doing all of that? And then, yeah, what was that transition like moving south?
Yeah. Remind me if I don't get to the second half, because the first half is slightly tangled. I'm going to try and keep it the abbreviated version. But how I wound up in the South, I mean, I guess I have always known, at least since 6th grade, my goal was to become a writer, which is a great goal, but it's sort of ambiguous. How do you do that? I don't know. And so my plan after college was like, I'm just going to live as interesting a life as I possibly can. And so I wound up accepting a job in South Dakota, teaching on the Oglala Lakota Reservation, Pine Ridge Reservation. Spent 2 years out there, came back east, kind of tried to get a start in newspaper journalism. It didn't really take. And then I was like, okay, what else can I do that is interesting? And again, interesting to me was meaning getting out of the suburbs in the Northeast where I grew up. And so Teach for America is the name of the organization that had brought me to South Dakota originally. I decided to apply for a job with Teach for America, and they said, would you like to go to the Mississippi Delta? And I was like, I don't even know where that is or what that is, but yeah, sure. I want another adventure. So in 2009, as a 25-year-old, I moved to rural Mississippi, where I was coaching teachers, and sort of, yeah, that was my introduction to the South. It was an interesting introduction. I think I arrived there saying like, had spent 2 years in South Dakota. I think I was like, maybe I'll spend another 2 years here and then I'll figure out what comes next. And the place just got under my skin, I think. I often call the Delta one of the most beautiful and haunted places in America. It's just like got some of the worst of the American story is caught up in its history, but that has produced beautiful culture, blues music, among other things. And it just felt, I don't know, it felt different. Like, I think the landscape out west is like more, I go out there and I'm like, oh my God, it's so beautiful. But it feels like a place to visit. And somehow arriving in Mississippi felt like a place to live. So that's sort of the beginning of the Southern story. We can dig more into that if you want. But as the outdoorsmanship, I mean, yeah, I grew up hiking, camping. I did a lot of that in South Dakota as well. That was where I kind of found my footing as an adult outdoors person. And then when I moved to Mississippi, I kind of struggled with this. It's very hot and humid and filled with mosquitoes. I actually write about this in the first issue of Southlands because I recently went to a gravel biking festival in the Delta, and that was like a loom. I was like, oh, this is, hiking doesn't make sense here. Camping doesn't make sense here. Biking, it does. But yeah, I sort of cast about for a while. I wound up, by happenstance, writing a magazine story about a canoe guide on the Mississippi River. And then I got obsessed with the Mississippi River, wrote a book about the Mississippi River. And so paddling became my way of being outside. The Mississippi, it runs right next to the Mississippi Delta. It is a gorgeous wilderness, and almost nobody knows that. So that was the project before this project. And they're all that book, The Great River. And they're both interrelated. So,
yeah, and so, thinking about the Mississippi as this place to sort of be discovered, I think is really interesting because on one hand, it would seem like, like the Mississippi has been obviously so documented in various ways over the many centuries of certainly European habitation. Obviously, it was important to the people who lived here before Europeans as well. But what did you find, like once you started kind of digging into it, I guess, what surprised you about it? Like what was there kind of sitting in plain sight that maybe the people who live there just sort of take for granted? People who don't live there just kind of know it as a big long line on the map. Were there still mysteries, I guess, to the Mississippi?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, there'll always be mysteries, and that's because it's wild and ever changing. But less sort of like mysteries to solve and more lost stories to retell. I give a talk a lot, and it's an hour long, so I'm going to try and keep it much briefer here. But I talk about how the Mississippi River is at once the most famous river, at least in the country, if not in the world, but it's also a lost river. Nobody, I think the average person, you ask what they look like, they have no idea. So growing up in Connecticut, by the time I got to Mississippi, I presumed that the Mississippi was just basically a giant engineered canal. And if you went out there, you'd just see sort of like concretized banks and straightened rivers and nothing that would look like nature. And so I was surprised from day one. Frankly, the first day I spent canoeing on the river, it was sort of overcast and the river was really high, so you couldn't see, like the trees were being swallowed. Being on the river wasn't always that beautiful, but then that's the first day I went out for this canoe camp trip. And so we landed on an island right near the border of Mississippi and Louisiana. And like immediately I was like, oh, like what, this is, nobody told me about this, right? So we were on this island, big sand beach shelf. There's a willow forest behind that. We could see, I think it's coyotes and beaver and deer tracks on other islands. You can see like wallows where wild pigs bury themselves. So like all this wildlife. And it was like a really interesting space, a special space to me because it felt so clearly wild. Right? Like I was like clearly in this wild feral forest and I was surrounded by water, and then beyond the water were the levees. And yet I could still get a little sense of life beyond the levee. I could like hear trucks driving past. And so it's this weird dichotomy. But yeah, I had lived in Mississippi for 6 years when I did that trip, and nobody had told me, it's really gorgeous out there. I think in part, I think some locals know that because people fish and things like that, but there's a lot of fear on the Mississippi River for good reason. People have stories of flooding, stories of lives lost there. And so there's not, a few people engage with it and most people don't. And so no one thinks to share that. And that was, it was really shocking to me. And I think to me, it became a story worth telling because I think that the Mississippi could be better taken care of if more people viewed it not as just this big industrialized thing, but another piece of beautiful nature that has assets beyond the fact that big boats can move along it.
Yeah, one thing that struck me in your book, the Great River, is once you get, because you do a great job of kind of laying out the literal history of it, the physical history of it, and kind of like how it developed and what it does. But then once we get to the human interaction with it, and especially the last couple hundred years, it's this kind of endless cycle of like solving problems and then creating future problems, trying to prevent flooding in one place, but then that water or that mud's got to go somewhere else. And then all the way down to the delta, the kind of constant struggle there between the freshwater and the saltwater and the different ecosystems and the interests that are engaged in like trying to preserve all of those. I guess having written that book and spent all of that time contemplating it, did it leave you optimistic, pessimistic about the river's future, or is it just kind of it's just something that is going to, for as long as people are going to be living with it and alongside it, it's going to be a constant sort of push and pull of managing it?
I would say all of the above, I guess. I think we are looking at a not great moment for the ecology of the river in the coming years, right? Because of the infrastructure we've built, because of climate change, creating bigger storms, changing flood patterns. We're really seeing some transitions in different parts of the ecosystem. So some of the floodplain forests, this is in the south, but up on the upper Mississippi, those are rapidly changing. Our engineering has caused the loss of the marshes down here in Louisiana, where I am, which is pretty catastrophic. Within the river channel itself, as far as we know, there's no actual river species, fish species that have disappeared. But the pallid sturgeon is this endangered species that's really struggling. So these are all sort of short-term issues. It's not as healthy a river as it was 200 years ago before the United States started messing around with it. That said, there's a song by the band Sunvolt that I love, and there's a line in there about the rhythm of the river will remain. And I think that is another, right? Like, hope is the wrong word for it, but the time I spent on the Mississippi, I was like, well, every time we build something, it kind of knocks it over or finds its way around it. And that's going to be perpetually true. The Mississippi almost certainly will outlive the United States of America, if not humanity itself. And it's going to change, right? Like the species composition, everything's going to change, but it will live on. And that's sort of how I think about nature more generally. It's sort of, nature is going to outlast us. Evolution will make its changes, but if we want to live with the kind of river, the kind of nature that we've enjoyed in the past, maybe we should be operating differently, right? So I guess you don't even need hope for the river. The river in the long term will be fine, but it's more of slightly pessimistic about our future relationship with the river. But seeing a lot of other people that share this point of view makes me hopeful that maybe we're close to a cultural shift of people thinking differently, not just about the Mississippi, but about nature across the South, across the world in new and better ways.
Yeah, and so I guess, does that also inform part of the mission of Southlands? That, I mean, it seems like there is a preservationist, I guess, mode there. You're like, it's not a quote unquote environmentalist publication, I guess, but it does seem like you're very attuned to wanting to not only kind of highlight and appreciate what's out there, but think about the ways that these various landscapes are threatened, including by human activity. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, I guess I would avoid the environmentalist label just because I'm afraid it would scare off certain people that I see as readers. But I mean, basically anyone who reads this magazine, I think people will come at it. They may have different ways of interacting with the natural world, whether that's biking through it, hunting, fishing, paddling like me. But I don't necessarily want to speak to the person that's just like, oh, I jumped on my bike and I did this rad ride down this mountain. Like, I want to speak to the people who, through these activities, come to love the landscape, want to know it better, want to understand it, want to preserve it. So the preservationist, we could get into preservation versus conservation and what that means. But people that develop an ethic about their place in the more than human world, that'd be another way of saying it, because they leave their homes and go do fun things outside, and it helps them realize there is this much bigger world around them. And so, connecting to the Mississippi River. I mean, I think in some ways the Mississippi is an outlier in the South in that we've done a lot wrong, but one of the things we've done, and I don't even know if we've done it more right, but my assistant editor at the magazine, Holly Hayworth, was pointing out, one of the things that distinguishes the South is we industrialized more slowly than other regions, and so there are some more traditions of interacting with the land, harvesting the land, growing things on the land. There's an interesting intermingling in a lot of places in the South of sort of black and white and indigenous cultures, and now increasingly other cultures as well. And so there's a closeness with the land that a lot of people in the South have that I think is valuable. And so it's like this interesting, I don't know, I have an essay that hopefully will come out soon about Alabama in particular, which is one of the most biodiverse places in the country, but it is one of the places with the worst environmental laws in the country. And so it's sort of we need to be aware of that balance and celebrating what we've got here, but then realizing, if we don't change some things, we've been surviving by the seat of the pants by the abundance that we've had, basically. And if we enjoy that abundance, then it behooves us to make some changes as well.
Yeah, that's one thing that I've thought about and seen, like here in Tennessee. Like obviously East Tennessee, we have the Great Smoky Mountains where we are surrounded by natural beauty. And on the one hand, there's a lot, I think people put a lot of value on that, whether or not they themselves go out and, hike on the weekends. And a lot of people do. But it can tip over into a sort of nostalgia. Like you'll hear people talk about growing up on, their grandparents' farm and so forth. And yet, like a lot of those farms don't exist anymore because they've been plowed under for subdivisions. And as you say, like the South was slower to industrialize, but we've been doing our best to catch up. And we're seeing, now things like, for example, these crazy new data centers that are being plopped down in these sort of pristine rural landscapes. And just, without any regard sort of to their impact on that. I guess I'm curious if you're in Louisiana. Louisiana has, it's one of the most polluted states in the country. Like how good a job are we doing in the South at actually, putting our money where our mouth is in terms of this fondness for, our surroundings?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I don't have a necessarily South-wide answer. I mean, my rough answer would be I think there are a lot of states that have less environmental protections than I'd like to see. But yeah, and the nostalgia you talk about is really interesting and really complicated to me. We have an essay in the first issue by a great writer named Olivia Paschal writing about Wendell Berry in particular and sort of the reverence that so many of us have for Wendell Berry's vision of this agrarian farming. And, I not only get why I think people are like, oh, how many generations has my family been here? Like, I do think that is something to celebrate. I think it leads to a deep bond with the land. Olivia's point in the magazine, though, is almost like that is, as valuable as that is, it doesn't really offer us much looking forward, right? Like there's no clear path to like if you have that, great, keep it, hold on to it, fight for that. But for people that are no longer on their intergenerational farm, or people who've never had that intergenerational farm, to hold that up as sort of the standard isn't particularly useful because it's impossible. We can't afford to buy land to do that again. And so we do need to be thinking about new ideas of the South of the future and what it means to relate to land in the South in the future. But again, I think that so long as we acknowledge the complexities of like, well, those intergenerational farms were built on what was once indigenous land, and some of them were cleared and farmed by enslaved labor. We need to reckon with that, but I don't think it is bad to note to like have that deeply rooted sense of this is my place. And one of the things I've loved about living in the South, like that wasn't my experience at all growing up. We moved. I'm first. My generation was the first of my family to be in Connecticut. I never felt rooted anywhere. And so part of what appealed to me was coming to Mississippi and meeting people who felt such depth of their identity in that place. Doesn't mean that they or their families had always taken care of that place in environmental or sort of social and economic ways. But it is an asset that the place has that I think we could draw on. So I don't know that I answered my question, but those are some random thoughts along those lines.
No, definitely. So I guess what do we have to look forward to? What I know the first issue just came out, but what I think I mentioned, there's a lot of coverage in there of sort of the efforts to recover in Western North Carolina from the effects of Hurricane Helene. What other landscapes are you looking at? What are the places that you want to explore and elucidate?
Yeah, well, yeah. So I am mailing out this first issue right now. It's mid-October as we talk, and it's been a lot of work. I sort of didn't really think through that at the beginning, but taping and mailing bags and getting them out. But and then the issue is available online, southlandsmag.com, or you can become a member and get the next 2 issues. But over the next 6 months, we'll be putting the stories online. So yeah, I've started with this sort of year after Helene package that we did for this issue, looking at how the recreation community is recovering there in Western North Carolina. But the issue's got, I wrote a story about, like I said, this gravel biking effort in the Arkansas Delta, and particularly thinking about how could this sport be something that might bring a little bit of economic help to a region that's really struggling, but also what questions does that raise about race and belonging and who gets to make investments. We've got a really beautiful memoir from a New York Times bestselling writer named Kim Cross, kind of reflecting on being mixed race in the South and what a hunting camp meant to her family as it sort of forged its own identity. The cover story is about prescribed burns, which is a really great example of sort of how are the assets we have in the South in terms of these traditions and cultures, what they really mean, right? So prescribed burns are becoming a common strategy for trying to stop wildfires. The idea being like, let's burn a little bit so that the wildfire can't come. But out west, where wildfires are a huge problem, nobody has done prescribed burns. And so the place where they come to learn that is actually in Florida, because here in the Gulf South of Florida in particular, a couple of nearby states, people never stopped burning. And so it is this kind of cultural tradition that's been passed on, and now we've become the center of that. So those are some of the stories. Then there's a lot of shorter stuff, little profiles of different species, different landscapes. A lot of stuff in those 140 pages. So,
all right. Well, and again, people can find all the information on subscribing at southlandsmag.com. And I guess just to close out, can you just tell me, and I know that like you know the places, everybody lives, like probably everybody across the South has their own favorite little place that they go. But what's a place that you love that you would recommend to people if they get the opportunity to go there just to experience it?
That's a good question. I mean, there's a bunch of them. And I apologize if anyone who knows my work has probably heard me talk about this already, because it's both wrote a little essay about this for Garden and Gun, and then took the same kernel. This is the editor's letter of this issue 1 of Southlands. But my wife and I every year go to this town of St. Francisville, Louisiana, which is kind of 2 hours north from New Orleans, basically, right along the Mississippi River. And it's a landscape that I think will surprise a lot of people because, for good reason, we often think about the Delta as being super flat, but there are places where there's these big bluffs. And so right outside of St. Francisville, there's this great hike through a place called Clark Creek Wilderness Area, I think. I'm forgetting the name. Natural Area. And so you can do like a 6-mile hike where there's waterfalls in Louisiana, which is a surprising thing. And then in a wildlife refuge near there is the champion bald cypress tree, the largest bald cypress tree, which is also the largest tree of any kind east of the Sierra Mountains. And so it's just this small, sleepy little town, but it's got, and there's some tourism that comes through, maybe too often probably for plantation tourism, but it's an example of one of these places that has these incredible natural assets that I think could be better known and that I'm trying to celebrate.
Great. Well, my wife and I come to New Orleans a lot, so we'll put that on the map
nice
to check out. All right. Well, thanks again for your time and thanks for your work. I think the magazine's great and the book is great as well. So I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Jesse. I'm really honored to be here. Appreciate you spreading the word.
The First Voices Festival continues this weekend in Atlanta. The festival started 3 years ago in the popular commercial district of Little Five Points. It has become Atlanta's only celebration of Native American arts, culture, and history that is actually led by indigenous people. The festival was created by the owners of a store called Turtle Island Trading Company, who include Yellowbird, a member of the Oglala Lakota Nation in South Dakota. They teamed up with the Little Five Points Business Association and the local independent theater company, 7 Stages. The result is a multi-week festival. It kicked off last weekend with a night of storytelling and a traditional powwow, both highlighting the traditional culture of the Muskogee, the indigenous tribe that lived in Georgia until they were expelled by the U.S. government during the Trail of Tears. First Voices continues this Saturday, November 21st, with a presentation by Seven Stages of Say Their Names, written by Marcy Rendon. The multimedia piece is dedicated to the more than 4,700 missing and murdered Indigenous women who have been documented across the United States and Canada. Violence against Indigenous women has long been both underreported and underinvestigated. Rendon is a member of the White Earth Nation in Minnesota. The same topic will be addressed during the final weekend of the festival with a screening of the documentary She Cried That Day on November 28th, maybe fittingly the day after Thanksgiving. The performance of Say Their Names is at 7:30 p.m. this Saturday at Seven Stages Theater. You can find a link to more information in our show notes. As part of its sponsorship of the festival, Seven Stages has also created something novel, a land use fee that it charges on all of its tickets year-round. Heidi Howard, artistic director of Seven Stages, told Arts ATL that it was a more concrete step than simply giving Indigenous land acknowledgments at events. She said, quote, "There was all this popularity around land acknowledgments, but it felt like talk and production. So we began charging a land use fee, a $1 charge for every ticket. The proceeds go to help Native individuals and organizations." And that wraps us up for this week. Remember, the Progressive South is a nonprofit media outlet, and you can find information about contributing to our efforts on our website, theprogressivesouth.org. If you do feel moved to make a donation, thank you. Thanks also to Bark for our theme music and to Lord Seth the Libertarian for his production work at Barbarian Productions. And thanks to you for listening. Remember, you can call and say hey from wherever you are. Just leave us a message at 865-214-7764. That's 865-214-PROG. Tell us your first name, where you're calling from, and take up to a minute to let us know what's going on where you are. You can also write me at jmayshark@theprogressivesouth.org. We'll talk to you later.